You're listening to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I recorded this episode on unceded Wurundjeri land in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia, where Aboriginal peoples had been birthing at home, on country, for thousands of years prior to the British invasion. They are the original storytellers. If you want to learn more about me, the podcast, or how I can support you in achieving your home birth, be sure to check out my Instagram at birthingathome_a podcast. Welcome to episode 33, and whoa, this is a great episode. The incredible Georgia from Tasmania shares how growing up, she didn't have any interest in pregnancy or children. Through learning more about the power and the history of birth, though, this changed. Today, Georgia shares her deeply traumatic birth with her daughter Bo and how discrimination against her and her weight significantly impacted her birth experience. For her next pregnancy, she chose to not outsource and instead, alongside a lot of learning and unlearning, she followed her own instincts. Little did she know that she would be having twin boys at home, unassisted. A surprise twin free birth that will have you smiling in awe. A truly incredible story that demonstrates the absolute power of women. I know you'll love this episode, so please rate or review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or send me a message. Stories like these don't come around very often, and they are incredibly important to share, so women around the world can be inspired and know that there is more than one option. Georgia's first birth was very traumatic, and if you find this triggering, I have included the timestamp in the description of where her wild pregnancy and free birth story begins. Enjoy! Welcome, Georgia, to Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Hi, how are you going?
I'm good. I'm so excited. It always feels so funny because listeners, we do catch up before we record, but for the flow, it just makes more sense to welcome you. So welcome, Georgia. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I have a theatre degree, so it probably felt really natural.
Yeah, well, there you go. I'm so excited to talk to you today, Georgia. As I was just saying, when I reached out to see if you would share your story with me on the podcast, I had no idea that it was actually a twin free birth that you had. And so I'm just like so grateful. And your boys are only like 4 weeks old, which is even more amazing. Do you want to start off by introducing yourself, about like who you are, who's in your family, and where you live?
Yeah, so I'm Georgia, based in Tasmania, and it's me and my partner Zave, and I've got a 3-year-old daughter Bo, and yeah, now the boys. Yeah, that's us.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I'm a family photographer, and yeah, just other than that, just very normal and just a person living in the world.
Yeah, just a regular old person.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And something I love to ask, so you had your first, your daughter in a hospital setting, is that right?
Yeah, and it wasn't my first choice either. Yeah,
okay. So, you know, growing up and like pre-pregnancy and all of that, had you known about home birth or free birth, that kind of thing?
Not really. Well, birth was actually, and just pregnancy and being a mum in general was not on my radar. I actually thought that I would never have kids. It didn't interest me. I've never been a particularly maternal person. It was just, so growing up, I'd never had any interest really. And actually in my early 20s, when some of my friends started becoming pregnant and becoming mums, I remember saying to one of my friends when she was pregnant that I really don't understand it. It's like having a parasite inside you. It's like a foreign object that must be so weird. And birth to me was everything I'd seen in movies. It was just this big, scary, dramatic thing that I just didn't understand why anyone would want to go through it. And it wasn't until about 2019 I actually listened to a podcast where Jane Collins Hardwick was the guest, and
Wow.
she was talking about her time as a midwife in, I think, in the 70s or the 80s, and how motherhood and maternity had been taken by the patriarchy, essentially. She was sort of breaking down how something that was very natural to women had been taken out of our hands and pathologized and turned into this big scary thing. And that
Yeah.
really was the light bulb moment for me. I'd never seen it from that point of view, and I couldn't believe that, like, how easy it was to fall victim to the brainwashing, essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the big turning point for me, where I realized, like, it's not a parasite, it's not a
Yeah.
freaky thing, it's not outlandish
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be pregnant, it's totally natural, and I've been convinced that it's like a machinery
A
type of
disease.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
disease, yeah, that it's
Yeah.
foreign.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that was the big turning point in my thinking. So by the time I did get pregnant in 2020, um, I already knew that I wanted a private midwife, and because I knew that, like, I've always had a strong sense of belief in my own body, and I've worked through a lot of self-esteem issues and body image issues, and I'm a big follower of health at every size. So I'd done all
Yeah.
this work before becoming pregnant. So by the time I was pregnant, I had the utmost faith in my body and its abilities. Didn't have
Yeah.
any interest in going to the hospital because I wasn't sick.
Yeah.
But I met with the local private midwife. There's only one birth centre where I am.
Yeah.
And yeah, met with them, and me and Dave had an interview with them. I was still very early in my first pregnancy. I think I was like 14 weeks or something. And she gave this big spiel about how they're very women led, and they believe in our body's ability to birth, and that they trust women's bodies and trust your intuition, and everything was like aligning. I'm like, yes, 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 this is me. The next day, they gave me a call and said they wouldn't be able to support me because of my BMI, and that I'd have to go through the hospital, but that they could still be my primary care if I wanted. I'd just have to give birth in the hospital and go through the obstetricians as well. And it just broke my heart. Like, from the very start. Like, I actually cried all day after I got that text.
Yeah.
It was so upsetting because, like, they convinced me that they believed in my body too, and then basically said, "You're too fat, sorry." And they never weighed me. So
oh my gosh.
I know, like, it was just a guess. I hadn't weighed myself in 5 years, and I told them that. So they were basing this off literally just looking at me.
What? Yeah, well, I mean, that's I listened to something maybe on the Birthing Instincts podcast, and it was talking about how, like, in healthcare there's a very big push, and as a nurse I can see how helpful it is, but for electronic medical records and electronic, documentation, and it can be programmed into these platforms that to get to the next page you must enter something, and that especially in healthcare, there's such a big focus on BMI. I remember when I went to my midwife, and I was a similar thing. I was like, I don't weigh myself. I don't know. And she was like, well, guess. And I was like, well, I don't know. But yeah, they have to have, like, give a number but that's that's ridiculous.
And I understand
that's so discriminatory.
It is, yeah, and it's not evidence-based, and that
No.
really annoyed me at the time because I knew it wasn't evidence-based, and they'd told me
Yeah.
that they believed in evidence-based practice. So, I mean, it was a blessing in disguise, really, because I it was better to find out that they weren't a good fit. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but basically that made me go, okay, well, they don't believe I can do it. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to pay $6,000 to have someone be my primary carer who doesn't even have faith
Yeah.
in my body's abilities. So
Yeah.
I'll just go it alone. That was basically
Yeah.
my mentality. I
Yeah.
figured if I was the only one that trusted my body, well, then that was all I needed.
Yeah.
But but then I continued to go through the hospital system where nobody
Yeah.
believed in my body, and I guess I thought that wouldn't matter, and that was
Yeah.
a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you feel like I imagine that, yeah, like perhaps you have in your head that like you're just another woman, so they're not really going to like give you much attention anyway, so you can just like rock on about and like do like, go through as you plan, I guess. But for a system that doesn't provide individualized care, it sure does get involved in individual matters an awful lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
And so what was your pregnancy then like in that kind of model of care?
well, I had a healthy pregnancy. I didn't have any high blood pressure or complications, but
Yeah.
they tried to find them at every possible opportunity. They just couldn't
Yeah.
believe that a fat person could have a healthy pregnancy, basically. So at first, my GP wanted me to do the what do you call it, the glucose test, and I'd already read up about it and was not interested. Didn't make any sense to me to like down sugar on an empty stomach while pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I agreed to a HbA1c instead. Because first pregnancy, I was still in the habit of compromising, I guess. I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but yeah, people pleasing was very much in full swing. So everything was a compromise. I didn't realize I could just say no full stop.
Yeah.
So yeah, did the HbA1c, and that came back. I think my fasting sugar was a 5.1, and my GP said that was all good because it had to be under 5.5, so I was in the clear. But then at about 24 weeks at a hospital appointment, the doctor wanted me to do the glucose test again because for some reason fat people have to do it multiple times. And I
so they made you do. Did they make you do the? So you did the HbA1c and then they asked you to do the full test with the drinks and everything.
Yeah, they wanted me to do it again, and I said no, but that I'd be happy to. Well, not happy to, but I was compromising again. So I said that I would be willing to take a blood glucose monitor home and track my sugar levels for a couple of weeks. So she called the diabetes clinic to organise getting me a monitor, and the woman on the phone was like, her fasting sugar's 5.1. She should have already been diagnosed. It's supposed to be under 5.0. So on the spot, I was diagnosed.
What? So they didn't, in the end, they didn't even make you do it again because they just gave you a diagnosis?
Yep, just on the spot based on the HbA1c from a while ago.
Oh my God.
Because of a 0.1 level difference.
What?
Yeah, ridiculous. So, and I really fought with the diabetes clinic a lot because I didn't believe that I had gestational diabetes at all.
Yeah.
And my food levels were always good. Like they always came back down within whatever the numbers were
Yeah.
after eating. So it was
Yeah.
only my fasting sugars that were an issue, and they were only ever zero 0.1 or 0.2 over. And I was constantly emailing the woman in charge there with like just bombarding her with questions because none of it made any sense to me.
Yeah.
I didn't understand, and to this day, didn't understand why at my hospital I have to be under 5.0, but I've heard of other hospitals within Australia where you only have to be under 5.5 or even 6.0. And her
Yeah.
answer to that was that it's based, I think it was something about it being based on resources. So because they have something about how if you live in a really big city with a big population, they don't have as many resources to treat a whole ton of women with gestational diabetes. So they make the limits higher, like 5.5, so that they can keep control on how many women are coming through. But because in my area they're well resourced, they're able to set the better limit of 5.0 and take more people on. But to me, that reads as they're able to falsely diagnose more women based on an arbitrary number so that they can get more
Yeah.
funding for the diabetes clinic.
It's
Like-
just so corrupt, right?
Yeah.
It's so corrupt.
It was such a money trail thing.
Yeah.
And also, I said to her several times, I really think my fasting levels are connected to my sleep. I think I have sleep apnea. I've noticed that on the nights that I have better quality sleep, my numbers are under. And she said that
Yeah.
it had nothing to do with sleep. I've since been diagnosed with sleep apnea and I'm on a CPAP machine. I actually had really, really severe sleep apnea.
Yeah, well.
So I do think that it was impacting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, that's just a whole
What
side
rubbish.
thing on GD.
And did that what did that kind of trigger for, like, in your case, having that diagnosis? Like, did that mean more appointments, or did you find that they treated you worse, or how did you experience it?
Yeah, it was more appointments. So now I had to go to the diabetes clinic to have like a lesson on what to eat that's good for blood sugar because, fat people don't know how to eat healthy. And more antenatal appointments. I was already labeled high risk because of my weight. But now it was like, see, we told you you're high risk. So they had that confirmation they wanted. And I had to do more scans because they wanted to do the growth scans.
Yeah.
And pretty much at every turn, every time they presented me with something like the extra growth scans, I was always going away and doing my own research and coming back to them with all these questions, and they never had satisfactory answers. Aside from all the noise and all the labels from them, I felt fine. I was having a great pregnancy. I knew that all was well. I had a lot of pelvic pain. And laxity in my pelvis. But everything I read said that was honestly helpful for the birth anyway, because all the ligaments need to separate. So I wasn't concerned about it. It was uncomfortable, but pregnancy is uncomfortable. I didn't have any concerns.
Yeah,
but all the doctors did just by looking at me. They just couldn't believe that there couldn't be something wrong with me.
Yeah. That's like atrocious, absolutely atrocious. And So what do you want to walk us through the birth experience then, or the lead up and birth experience?
Yeah, so around
Or actually before you do that, did you do any particular apart from the stupid nutrition diabetes thing, did you do any like birth preparation kind of stuff in this pregnancy?
I had like a birth ball that I sat on a lot because everything
Yeah.
online said it's good to sit on those. I did
Yeah.
some spinning babies. My little sister was actually pregnant at the same time, and she was going through the private midwife.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I got a lot of holistic info passed on through her. And yeah, we were very much aligned. So she was having the pregnancy journey that I wanted, and the only difference was
Yeah.
my weight.
Yeah.
So yeah, doing lots of research. I don't really remember. I've read Ina May Gaskin's book, and I can't remember what it's called. The biggie of hers.
Yeah,
I've
the
blanked on it now.
childbirth guide to Ina May Gaskin's Guide to Childbirth, I think,
Yes,
is it? Yeah.
that's the one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was reading a lot of stuff that was home birth leaning, and I don't think I'd heard the term physiological birth at the time, but there was a lot of physiological birth stuff in there, and I was just always like, yes, that's how it should be. Let nature run its course. And at some point during the pregnancy, I did hear about the concept of free birth. But I was still in that mindset of, but if things go wrong, what would you do? Like, how could you risk, what would you even do if something happened? It can be dangerous sometimes.
Yeah.
And that just seems too outlandish and crazy to me. Like, so
Yeah.
I didn't even look into it. It was so foreign to me, even though, like, in hindsight, it's everything I wanted.
And to know now that you free birth twins, like, oh my gosh, like what a different mindset, because this is in 2020 or 2021?
2020, yeah. A lot of growth in a few years' time.
Yeah, that's incredible. What's your daughter's name? Sorry,
Bo. So it's like Bo Peep.
Bo. Yeah, cute. And yeah, okay. So do you want to run us through the birth of Bo then?
Yeah. So, I think it was around 40 weeks, or around 38 weeks or so, they'd started hassling me about induction because they just love inductions. And I had GD, so I was high risk. And I kept saying, no, like, everything's fine. I feel fine. I want her to come in her own time. And I think it was at an appointment I think it was 40 weeks. It could have been 39. That I said no again to an induction. And the doctor that I had that day, and I should mention as well, I had different doctors throughout the antenatal care. I probably saw every OB that worked in that hospital. I never saw anyone consistently. And I only met with the midwives twice, I think. So I was just a person described on a piece of paper to them. They had no idea about me. As a person, I was just, number whatever on the call sheet. Like,
it could have been a completely made up story. They wouldn't even know.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so the doctor I had that day said, "Oh, well, shall we do a really quick ultrasound just to check that everything's okay?" And again, people pleaser me, compromiser me. I didn't need an ultrasound. I knew everything was fine, but I figure, what's the harm? Like, they want to know, I'll let them know. So we went in and she did a quick ultrasound. She went away for a little bit, and when she came back, it was like she was so grave and like sat down and gave me the bad news that I had low fluid and it's an emergency, and in her opinion we should do an induction immediately.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, what do you mean, like tomorrow? Do you want to schedule it for tomorrow? And she was like, no, like right now. And
Wow.
I was freaking out, but
Yeah.
luckily some of my research sort of kicked into gear, and I was like, well, hold up, you're allowed to say no and that you want to do some more research, and you're allowed to hit the brakes here. So I did that, and I said I want to call my partner and discuss it, and and she was like, not really happy about it, acting as if that any delay is too much delay. And
oh my gosh.
she made me go down and have another ultrasound with a proper technician just to double check, because she's not a technician. So I did that.
Yeah.
And then was on the phone to my partner outside the hospital just freaking out and crying, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, they told me this is an emergency and I don't know anything about low fluid. Like, I don't know what's happening. So went home that night and just I was online scrolling and doing as much research as I could do. And there's not tons of research on low fluid, like not unbiased evidence-based research. So it was really tricky to like weigh up how big of an issue this really was. But my partner did say at the time, well, it can't be that much of an emergency, or she would have recommended a C-section. So that really grounded me, and I was like, oh yeah, like there's no way they would try for an induction if it was like a genuine emergency. If my baby could die within the next hour, they're not going to be messing about with inductions. So that calmed me down a bit, and I knew I had more time. The research I did said that maternal hydration can be an impacting factor, and I hadn't had any water before those scans that day. Because it was a morning appointment, I'd had a coffee, and I forgot to bring my drink bottle to the appointment, so I hadn't really had any water. And it also said that fluid levels can drop at the end of pregnancy anyway. So after reading that and tuning back into my intuition, I was just like, I don't know, I feel fine. My baby's telling me that everything is fine. But that little seed that they'd planted in my head, it's like a weed.
Seed of doubt.
You can keep ripping the weeds out, but they just keep coming back. So, we had to go in. Well, we didn't have to, but compromise. I was just compromising. So they told me they wanted me to come in for daily CTGs. So we would go into the hospital every evening. This is in 2020 when you still have to wear masks. My partner wasn't allowed in there with me.
Oh my gosh. So true.
So the first night they said, oh, sorry, your partner can't come in. You have to do the CTG alone. And I went along with that. At the end of the CTG, or while I was strapped in, whichever OB was on the ward that day came in and gave me the big dead baby talk, and we really think you should have an induction, and, you know, things can change in just an instant, and blah, blah, blah. And after that, I was like, I'm not doing this alone, because they're cornering me. They're waiting until my partner's not there so that they can try to scare me into doing what they want. So the next day they made us sit down with another OB. And this woman, she was a real piece of work. Like I've said, I was in people pleaser mode. I'm naturally a very what's the right word? Like middle ground sort of person. I'm not antagonistic.
Okay.
I don't like conflict. So usually
Yeah.
I can talk my way around people and keep a situation calm. But
Yeah.
she just had a massive ego on her.
Yeah.
So yeah, we went in. I had questions about the low fluid and wanted. I was trying to ask her like, well, I've read this, and this. What say you to that?
Yeah.
And she was just taking it all very personally and was like, oh, what website are you reading that on? Well, I've only done 8 years of medical training, but I guess they know better. Yeah,
Oh.
actually
Oh
saying
my
things like that.
gosh. Yeah.
Talking about the stillbirths that she's witnessed and acting as if I don't know a thing. I've never
She was
experienced heartache.
telling you this.
Yeah, basically treating me like I was being so flippant about the whole thing. And eventually she stormed out. And then I had to go in and do the CTG. And I'm pretty sure I said to them I wasn't doing it unless my partner could come in that time. And they weren't happy about it, but in the end they caved.
Yeah.
And while we were in there, so when I'd had that run in with the OB, she'd had like an assistant or a student in there with her. And
Okay.
when we went in to do the CTG, the student or whatever she was came round and she'd printed off some information for us. She was like, that doctor's, she's just a little bit touchy because she's seen things go wrong and she really is just trying to help. I know that her attitude probably didn't come across well. And anyway, here's some research for you. And when I read the research at home later, it directly contradicted what the OB had been telling me. She'd been trying to say that maternal hydration wasn't an impacting factor and what I'd read was wrong. And then this assistant of hers had printed me off research that literally said maternal hydration is a factor.
Oh my gosh.
It was just
what
infuriating.
The heck? Yeah.
Yeah, so we continued to go in with these daily CTGs, and meanwhile, I'd asked my sister if she could put me in contact with her private midwife, because by then she'd had her baby and the private midwife had moved interstate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we were waiting a little while for her to get back to us. And when she did, she was super encouraging. She said, this isn't an emergency. Trust your gut. Stop going in for these CTGs because they're just making you anxious. And if you look into CTGs, they're not very reliable anyway. Basically just encouraged me to trust myself and to just wait because that's what I was being called to do.
Yeah.
So I told the hospital the next time we went in for a CTG, I said, this is the last. We're not coming in after this. Because every day, we went in for like a week, and every day, all that was showing was that my baby was fine. It was hectic.
Oh my gosh. But that's like totally disregarding the psychological impact. Like I cannot believe, I mean, I can, but also it's still shocking to me that someone with such power would be telling you at 38 or however many weeks that your baby could die. I've seen lots of stillbirths and just like giving you all of these traumatic things. Like it's totally disregarding the psychological impact of the words that she's speaking, because like it's not just in that moment that you're thinking about that. You're going home and thinking about, well, what if my baby dies, and that like just
constantly. It was the most anxious 3 weeks of my life. Because by then I think I would have been over 41 weeks. So they're every day getting more stressed because now I'm overdue. So I'm high risk because of my weight. I've got GD and now I'm overdue. And they were just like biting their nails with fear pretty much. So the last time we went in, another doctor came around to give me the dead baby talk. it's just part of their routine, I suppose. Happened every day. And I said to her, like, I don't know what to tell you. My baby is telling me she's fine. And
Yeah.
that's, I've got nothing else for you. She's telling me she's fine and that I just have to wait. And this doctor made me sign a waiver saying I was going against medical advice, which I remember we left that appointment and I just burst into tears because they'd put so much doubt in. Like, it's hard to explain. I still had so much faith whenever I tuned in to my intuition, but they were throwing me off my intuition just back and forth. So I'd leave these appointments just reeling and thinking, what if I am just a big idiot?
But it starts I've talked about this before, but somebody told me like quite a few episodes ago that, you know, that first doubt, you could consider the first doubt in yourself, in your body, as being the pregnancy test, you know, because you need something to confirm that you're pregnant. And it's like, they chip away, chip, wear you down, and you like, it's two steps forward, one step back, kind of like you're always having to fight and reevaluate your own values and your own knowledge about your body, and exhausting, so exhausting.
Yeah, tell me about it. So every day after that was just, you know, just waiting and stressing and just hoping any sign of labour would happen just so that I could be free of this anxiety. And every time I didn't have movements for a little while, I was freaking out and like jostling my belly, like, please move, baby, please don't let them be right. So, and I didn't have any of these doubts before that. One of my biggest regrets in that whole pregnancy and birth is that I went in for that ultrasound that I knew I didn't need, because I knew I was fine before I walked in there, and I didn't know I was fine when I walked out, and that's all it takes. Like that taught me a big lesson in there are just some things that you really don't need to know, because I didn't need to know that I had low fluid. I felt fine.
But and if baby's movements and everything are good, then
that's all you need.
How ridiculous.
In my opinion.
Yeah, that's all you need.
I hadn't had any spotting. I hadn't had any concerning symptoms. Like, I felt fine. But so I ended up going to 43 weeks. And I do think all the stress stalled things. But, you know, also first-time mum, so it would have been long anyway, but I don't think it would have been that long. And, so the day of the labour, it was a Monday. I just felt different when I got up that morning. I just had, like, a feeling that today might be the day. Later in the afternoon, I went and had a nap, and when I woke up, I was in the kitchen making a coffee or something, and had my first contraction. And I knew that was the beginning. So that was exciting. I was like, finally, finally things are starting. But those 3 weeks were the longest year of my life.
Absolutely.
So, things started off, and I think the contractions were slow initially. They were like half an hour apart and not too intense or anything. We had takeaway that night and watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Nice.
And eventually we tried going to bed because I think it was like midnight, and we figured I should try and have some rest. But every 20 minutes I was waking up to these contractions, and I couldn't really lay on my side or my back or anything. I had to be like on my hands and knees or upright. So I didn't feel like I got any rests that night. I ended up getting up at like 6 or 7 a.m. because it was exhausting me. Um,
Yeah.
and then continued labour all through the next day, and things were still pretty slow. Sometimes contractions would be 15 or 20 minutes apart, and then they'd maybe slow down to like an hour apart.
Yeah.
So not consistent. Some of them, I think at that point they were pretty painful at times, and I was still mostly having to just get up onto my hands and knees every single time.
Yeah.
And went right through to that night, and I think we were watching TV again. I was sitting on my birth ball, and around 11 or 10 p.m. maybe, things started to feel more like I was getting into that transition space. And I hadn't really done any research on physiological birth during that pregnancy, so I didn't really know about transition. I didn't know a lot about like labor in general. That was one thing I hadn't done any research on. You do so much research on pregnancy, but you sort of forget about the big event sometimes, like when you're a first-time mum. It's odd that. But so I was definitely feeling more spaced out, and I laboured on the toilet for a little bit, and I was having to stand up by then for every contraction. So I was, and they were about 2 minutes apart, and we'd put it off, like we knew to put off as long as possible going to the hospital, because one of the midwives had told us to do that. You know, it's bad when the midwives are telling you to wait until the last minute because they know you're going to be interfered with. Yes. Anyway, so yeah, we held off.
There's no point even trying to understand the logic, because it's just there's so many things that happen in the maternity system where like it just simply just does not make sense. Like even the fact that they often tell women to stay at home for as long as you can, blah blah blah. Nobody ever questions why. It's because you feel safe in your home. Like they don't want women that are in early labor in the hospital.
Well, that's it. I was going to say
like waste of resources for them.
Yeah, it's inconvenient to them. Yeah, but I do think it's also because they know you have better chances of not having interventions if you can just come in and have the baby straight away. So, we thought we'd held off as long as humanly possible. Contractions were like 2 minutes apart.
Yeah.
Hindsight is is such a salty thing, because I look back and I know if I'd just stayed home another couple of hours, I could have had her at home. Because, and I'm going to try not to cry for the whole next chunk, because the story gets dark. It was not a pleasant birth. So, we got in the car and went to the hospital. The whole walk in, I'm having to stop every few steps for a contraction. We got up to the suite, and it was like midnight. And you have to stop and sign in on the sign-in sheet between contractions. The absurdity.
Did you have to do like a COVID test or like temperature kind of stuff?
No, thankfully. I think because by then it was February of 2021, so things had chilled a little bit. So, and they got us into our labour room, and I remember thinking, because we'd seen a couple of the labour rooms when we'd done our CTGs, and most of them were quite like homely and comfy, and this room was very not that. It was like, it felt like a hospital room, and it had all like the emergency gear on the walls and stuff. And it didn't have like any of the light dimmers and things like that. Like it just felt like an emergency room. So we got in, we sat down, and just again, like the hindsight of it, we had to sit down and like chat to the doctor and the midwife first while I'm having contractions every couple of minutes. And I tried to hand them my birth plan. I was like, oh, here's my birth plan. And neither of them took it. And it was really weird. I like just held my hand out for a second and then just sort of put it down because nobody was taking it. Very weird way to start things off.
Yeah.
And it was like a business negotiation. They immediately were like, well, we want you to put on the CTG. And I was like, I don't want to do that because I want to be able to move around freely. But I will compromise with you. You can use the Doppler intermittently, even though I didn't need any, I didn't need anything to tell me that I was fine. I knew I was fine.
Yeah.
That was for them.
It was all for them, yeah.
Yeah. They said they wanted me hooked up to an IV. I said, I don't want that. I've got my water bottle here. I'm fine. I will compromise with you and put in an IV lock, even though I don't want one. But I was adamant that I wanted to get in the bath for pain relief or the pool or, whatever. And they said that I wasn't allowed because of my weight and that it's a safety issue. And if the staff, if something happens and I pass out and the staff have to pull me out, it's not safe for the staff. I don't know, some bullshit like that. And we argued about this for about 2 hours. Like, no joke. It was hours that I argued with them about this, stopping every couple of minutes to have a contraction. And I'm saying to them, I've spoken with a private midwife. She's already told me you have no legal right to stop me from getting in the bath. I know I'm entitled to this bath. I know you can't stop me. And they would just sit there and say nothing.
Yeah.
They were just like, well, it's not happening. They weren't giving in on it.
Yeah.
And they kept looking across at my partner like, are you really on board with this? Like, they were waiting for him to jump in and convince me as well.
Yeah.
Which he wasn't about to do because he's not a turd.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to the point where I was just like, this is absolutely ridiculous. Fuck it. I'll just get in the shower. Like, I just wanted to be done with this. And so I got in the shower, which was great. It was all right. The hot water was good. It's all I needed. And still having to stand up for every contraction. I ended up vomiting. Like, I was very much in transition. It was getting to the point where the contractions were starting to almost feel good. Yeah, all those endorphins and hormones and things were really starting to flood my brain and things were feeling good. But every 15 minutes, that midwife was coming into the bathroom to get me out of the shower and do the Doppler. And there was no lock on the bathroom door. So the private midwife had told me if we wanted privacy just to lock the door and that they wouldn't be able to come in. There was no lock on my bathroom door. And she would just let herself in. By then I'm like completely out of it. I'm not in my rational brain. So, I'm a people pleaser. So I'm getting out of the shower and doing the Doppler. And it was stalling things, as you can imagine. And after a few hours had passed, they wanted me to do a cervical exam. And I'd already known going in that I didn't want any cervical exams. I knew that it was bullshit to go off what the cervix was doing, but I was in a different world, so I just went along with it. And they checked my cervix and they said I was only 4 centimeters. And by then I've been in labor for over 36 hours. I've been cornered from the moment I've walked into this room. And I'm transitioning. I'm very vulnerable. And I'm at that moment where every woman in labor hits where they say they can't do it anymore. So they tell me I'm only 4 centimeters, and I look at my partner and I say, I can't do this anymore. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. We should just go and have a C-section.
Yeah.
And sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. That's all right. There's a lot of memories.
God, I can feel my heart racing just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Just no support except for my partner, but
Yeah.
you know, he was as vulnerable as me, and we were both
Yeah.
being cornered.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to do either.
Yeah.
So at that point, I've pretty much said, just take me in for a C-section. Like, this whole thing, you fucked it. Like, it's
Yeah.
ruined anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the midwife and the OB said if I got an epidural, I'd be able to have some rest and still progress, and I could try for a vaginal birth tomorrow. So I was like, by then, the contractions were excruciating because of all the fear and adrenaline.
Yeah.
So I was pretty much screaming through them, like they were so painful. And I just did whatever at that point. So they gave me the epidural. Now I'm on a CTG. They've set me up with the IV. Everything they wanted, they got. But I was able to actually get some much needed sleep. So the bed they had me on as well was like not a bed. It was like what I imagine an operating table must feel like. Like it was so hard. It was really uncomfortable. And I've been having a back labor this whole time, so now I'm on my back, and like it was not comfortable. It was horrible. And then the next day, the midwives are, changing shifts, and the midwives that I had were real, like, chirpy and just like they did not have a clue what we'd been going through up to that point. Again, just like the way that people in the system just have no idea who you are or where you've been. Strange feeling. So it took like a whole day, but by about 6 p.m. that evening, so first contraction was on Monday afternoon, it's now Wednesday evening. And the midwife that was on then was, I don't think she was maybe she was a student. She was quite young, and she was the only one that actually had paid attention to my birth plan and knew that I wanted a natural birth and was actually trying to facilitate that as best she could. She'd tried to get me to use like the peanut ball to see if I could change my position slightly. Anyway, so she said that I was 10 centimeters dilated. So like the finish line was like in sight, and I'm feeling like this is awesome. But I also couldn't. I was like numb in my pelvic floor, so I couldn't feel what was going on at all because of the epidural. So they said I would have to do coached pushing, and wouldn't you know it, but the OB who was on that night was, of course, the ego OB that I'd had the run-in with. Of course it was.
Oh.
It's like
this is the one that told you about stillbirth and all of that, right?
Yeah, the one who got all hoity
in 8
about,
years or however many years
training.
of study. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's like Stephen King wrote it himself.
That's terrible.
Yeah. So she told me to hold my breath and push with all my might on every contraction. And the contractions were quite painful still. There was a lot of pain in like the front of my right hip. So I think that Bo just wasn't in the right position. Because I'd been standing so much during the labour, I just needed to be upright or on my hands and knees or something. But of course, they wouldn't let me move. They ended up convincing me to do the fetal clip, which is actually a screw. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I knew it was a screw because I'd read about that, but when they say that they're going to put the clip on, you
Yeah.
sort of forget in the moment that they're using trickery.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's horrendous because, yeah, as a person that, doesn't work in healthcare, in the maternity system, that's not in birth suite, I imagine that if someone uses different terminology, you might think, oh, well, maybe they've invented something different and maybe it is a
yeah,
clip because they've called
yeah,
it a clip and a screw are very different.
exactly.
Um,
It's very
yeah,
much intentional deception. Um,
yeah,
so much for informed consent, hey?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so yeah, they put the clip on and the clip, and um, yeah, so I'm doing these, holding my breath and pushing with all my might on every contraction, and it felt so wrong, and I knew it was wrong because I had read a book about uh, like breathing techniques that said, you're supposed to breathe, and also just common
Yeah,
sense would tell you you're supposed to breathe during any exercise. Um,
yeah, yeah, so true.
and the holding my breath was making everything so much more painful. And,
Yeah,
I've done research since then and realized that I was cutting off the oxygen supply to my baby and my uterus. So it's no wonder it was so much more painful.
yeah,
And at some point during all that, the midwife had told me the OB had me on a time limit for the pushing. And even though I knew it was arbitrary, I didn't know in that moment because, again, I'm in a different world. And
yeah,
she told me, doctor's got you on a time limit. I'm just letting you know because I know you want a natural birth. And I just immediately think, I've got to get this baby out as fast as I can so that they can't fuck with me
yeah,
anymore. um,
yeah, yeah,
so that's why I did the coached pushing, because I really wanted to get my
yeah,
baby out safely and quickly so that they couldn't dick around with me anymore. Um,
yeah,
and it wasn't working. um,
yeah,
and then the OB comes in and says that the time is up essentially, and they're thinking they're going to do a ventouse extraction or forceps delivery. And in all the things that I knew could happen in a hospital birth, I didn't think they used forceps anymore. Like, in my mind, that was like
mm,
something they did in the 50s. It's like, it's
yeah.
not a thing anymore. So as soon as she said the word forceps, I was just like, you fucking what? Like, no.
What?
Um,
Yeah,
but before I even had a chance to say or think anything, I got another contraction. It's just excruciating, blinding pain. Like, so much fear running through me. Of course, it was painful.
yeah,
I've got an
yeah,
epidural, but I can still feel all this pain. Like, the adrenaline was overtaking it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they'd actually given me, because they reserved some of the epidural in case you need more, and they'd already given me the other
Okay.
half, and it
Yeah,
did nothing. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, so I have this overwhelming contraction, and they just go. Like, they just call a met call, and suddenly the room is flooded with people, and they're just doing it. They're just doing a ventouse, what, the vacuum.
yeah. The vacuum. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I struggle for
So
words.
yeah. So they've come in. They've said, so there's this ob that you already don't like because she's been horrible and been quite
Mm,
frankly a bitch. Um,
I'm
she's
nodding.
come and said we think that we're gonna have to do ventouse or forceps, and before you've even been able to have a conversation during labor about this, something's obviously triggered that, like, I don't know, like a Met call. And then, so everybody's come in, the lights, presumably, if they weren't on, they're definitely on now, I would presume.
Yeah.
You've then got like a heap of people that you've probably, well, you wouldn't have seen before.
Yeah, just random people. I don't. How do they decide who comes during a Met call? I don't know, because like
it's
it was
anyone.
just a bunch of strangers.
It's anyone. In healthcare, yeah, in healthcare, whenever there's a code blue, Met call, code black in some cases, it just means if you're available, you go.
Right.
And that's as simple as that. It has no regard of who actually needs to be there. Like that's just, yeah. And then I've been in situations where as a nurse, I've just been, waiting for someone to call off the code, and you're just you're all just sort of standing there in the corridor, or in the person's room or whatever, just waiting. Yeah.
Well,
but there's no rhyme or reason as to who's there. It's just it's super overwhelming. Yeah.
Was like it's like the scenes you see in movies where like someone's strapped to a table and the lights and everything's dizzy and there's faces everywhere. It was exactly like that. So people everywhere. She's doing this ventouse extraction and it was excruciating. And I'm just screaming, stop. And by then I knew there was no stopping it. I knew they were doing it, but I needed a break from the pain. So I'm just yelling, stop, like actually screaming. And nobody's doing anything. And I'm looking up at my partner and my partner's crying. And I'm screaming, this is wrong. And nobody's doing anything to stop it. I felt like a dog, like I was just barking and they didn't speak my language. So the ventouse failed and they moved on to the forceps and just ripped my daughter out of me. And I remember as I felt her pass through at the end, I thought to myself, like, that wasn't so bad. I could have done that if you'd just left us alone. I could have done that.
Yeah.
And so they ripped her out and they just passed her up to me. And the way she was crying sounded exactly like the sound I'd just been making. And my first thought was, oh no, I've taught her to make these noises.
Georgia.
And I'm saying to her, like, my first words to her was just begging her to forgive me because I felt like I'd failed to protect her. And this whole room full of people can hear me, and that fucking OB that just ripped my daughter out of me is going, congratulations, do we have a boy or a girl? And like I'm just nothing. Just absolutely abhorrent.
That's disgusting. That's
I still to this day can't believe it. I've done EDMR therapy and it's still, or EMDR therapy, it still affects me, like if I tell the story. Horrific. But yeah, so we had actually waited to find out the gender, so we didn't know yet either. So that was one redeeming thing, is we got to have this nice surprise when we saw we had a daughter. And they tried to cut the cord, and I said, has it stopped pulsing? Because that was another thing I wanted, was delayed cord clamping. And I think
Of
they
course,
knew that
yeah.
they'd put me through enough at that point, because they left it.
Yeah.
I guess they weren't pushing their luck any further with me.
Yeah.
So we did get to. It was not very delayed. I think it was cut after about 15 minutes, but they
Yeah.
wanted to cut it immediately. So, and then they did all the fundal massage, and because I think I hemorrhaged,
Yeah.
and once the placenta was out, I had a 2nd degree perineal tear, so they stitched that up. And
Yeah.
all of this just happened so fast. It was between like the forceps happening and the next 30 minutes, it felt like it was on fast forward to me. And just suddenly
Yeah.
everything was done and the room was empty and everyone was gone.
Yeah. You know, the being called fat or being considered that your BMI is too high and the focus around your weight seems like such a minor thing when you're 20 weeks pregnant or something, but what it triggers is such a big thing. Like, it's like that's the first domino to fall, and I just
Definitely.
because if it wasn't for that BMI, you would have been able to engage with private midwives.
Yeah.
And it would have looked so different.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It's as you know that saying, like when a butterfly flaps its wings, like its effect is felt, so far away. Yeah. That's such a heavy story, Georgia. I'm so sorry that you had such a horrendous experience, when you're meant to feel empowered and amazing and loved up and be able to, immediately fall in love with, this life that you've just given birth to, like how messy that was for you. And I really hope, but I also understand that it can be a pretty full-on experience, but I hope that you have, or that you someday make a complaint about all of this.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how yet. I would really like to report that OB. And, in my perfect world, she would never practice medicine again.
Yeah.
I consider her my rapist. So I'm not sure how to go about getting justice.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Did you ever happen to get your hands on your medical records?
I did, yes. And that's what I was going to say before. So I went through my labour notes because I wanted to know if there was a genuine emergency, if there was a reason why that was triggered and that it ended in forceps. There was not one word in there that there was anything wrong with Bo to justify their actions.
Yep.
So there was no mention of her having decelerations that were outside the realm of normal. I don't think there was even any mention of the Met call or why the Met call was made. It was just noted that it was a forceps delivery. And, of course, it was not noted that there was no consent. My little sister had a look at the notes because she's a nurse, and she did say that I would have grounds to potentially sue, she thinks, because there was no mention of actually receiving consent.
Yeah.
Then that's implied that consent might not have been gained, or what do you say?
Yeah.
That they might not have had consent. So she thinks that would be grounds enough to potentially escalate it, but and I would like to, but up until recently, it's still been too traumatic for me to even consider doing that. So
Yeah. Well, how dare they? Yeah, how dare they? Because the amount of, you know, hell, I guess, that you've had to go through and be in, and hell inside your own mind, having to get like pretty intense trauma therapy because of, such an experience. Like, how
yeah,
dare they live their lives not knowing the impact that they have had on your entire being,
yeah,
like, that's
that's it.
disgusting.
And they're allowed to move forward from that experience, patting themselves on the back and considering themselves heroes without
Yep.
any knowledge of how it affects people for the rest of their lives, potentially.
Yep. 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 The sad thing, Georgia, is they probably don't even remember it. They
No,
probably
that's
don't
it.
even remember. They won't remember your name.
No.
Absolutely. And they probably just don't remember that entire thing. Like, it probably is so
No.
common for them to experience such fucked up situations, and to get so involved in things that they don't need to be involved in, that it would just be a normal part of their, work life. Like,
yeah, it was
anyway,
just
we
another
could
Wednesday
go.
for her.
Yeah, just another Wednesday. We could go on about how fucked this all is. What is so redemptive, though, is that you've had this free birth. So tell me,
Yeah.
after you've had Bo, presumably it was a pretty emotional postpartum. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of moments in the weeks and months afterwards that I would just catch myself sort of dissociating and going back there. I had, and I didn't realize at the time, I had so much tension in my body and especially in my shoulders that I thought was from breastfeeding and, just being a new mum and that kind of thing. But I'm breastfeeding twins now and I don't have any tension.
Yeah.
So that was the trauma that was stored in my body coming out physically.
Yeah. And so after you had Bo, did you think that, at what point did you think that maybe you might like to be pregnant again?
I don't know. I think I always knew. The thing was that as traumatic as that birth was, I feel fortunate in some ways because I knew as it was happening and I knew after that it was not how it was meant to be. And by that I mean it's not how birth was meant to be. So it didn't really deter me because I just knew that it was meant to be so different to that and that it could be. Come here. Of course they decide to fuss now.
That's okay. That's okay. They've been very, very patient.
They have. They're both deciding they want to feed right now, so.
Oh, bubbas.
So, come here. I've lost my train of thought.
That's okay. So you kind of had thought that, it could be different, and now I guess you're sort of, savvy to all of the ways that they can mess up your plan.
Totally. So I remember saying to my partner about maybe a week or so after we'd had Bo, we were having dinner one night and I said to him, what if we did just stay home next time? Because we'd talked about like how different it would have been if we'd just never left that night. Yeah. And then I started thinking for real, like what if next time we just didn't go? And as soon as I thought that, my very next thought was, oh, but what would I tell my family? Like everybody would freak out. And what would I tell Zave's family? Like how would I explain to them that we're not having any care and they would be so worried? And maybe I should send a message to that private midwife and see what she thinks about free birth. And it as soon as I had that thought, I realized I'm outsourcing again. I'm giving my power to other people again.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And I think it's very
I'm
funny.
still
You
doing it.
just used the word care, and it's so funny because it's so funny in a sadistic kind of way that, you know, people worry that we're not going to get care, but what they provided to you is not care.
That's
So
exactly
like,
it. Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of a backwards thought, really. But yeah, as soon as I had that realization of like I'm still asking for permission, I knew
yeah,
that was the thing that had to stop. Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I think as soon as I realized that, my mind was made up. I was like, I know that this is what I need, and I have to learn to not care what anybody else thinks.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so over the next 3 years, I didn't have like a timeline for when I would be pregnant next. I knew it would probably happen at some point, but um, we weren't going to be intentionally trying.
yeah.
Um, and I was visited by a spirit baby when Bo was about 6 months old. So I was
Yeah,
driving to my
okay.
sister's house, and
Yeah,
I'm just stopped in traffic, and it's just a regular day. And I just suddenly had this sort of voice in my head that was saying, like, hey, what's up? I'm here. My name's
yeah.
Hazel. Don't expect me anytime soon. This is Bo's time. So,
Yeah.
but you'll be hearing from me.
Whoa, I've just got like so many chills in my body. Yeah, okay. Yep.
it was really surreal. And at that point, I hadn't heard of the concept of spirit babies. So this was
Yeah.
just
Oh,
really random
wow.
to me.
Okay.
And I
Wow.
didn't know
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if I was like, is my imagination running wild? Like, what just
Yeah.
happened? um,
Yeah.
but it was less what she said and just more the feeling I got. I got this just like I knew her energy immediately,
Yeah.
and she was very calm and quiet and wise, um, sensitive, just very different to Bo. Bo is like my wild child, and even in the womb, she was very active and like she's like fire. Um,
Yeah.
so I didn't hear from her again for a couple of years, maybe not even until I was pregnant.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so yeah, we weren't trying to get pregnant, and we didn't get pregnant until I think it was like July last year.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't know for the first 8 weeks, I'd say.
Yeah.
um, it's funny, like once you hear how the birth played out, but yeah, it's hard to explain being so in tune with your body, but also being so unaware of certain things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did not know I was pregnant at all, even though all the signs were there. Like I had all the symptoms that I'd had with Bo, so you know,
Yeah.
really sore, tender breasts, and just feeling sort of queasy and full and bloated all the time, and I
Yeah.
was super tired. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's all right, um,
Oh, Baba.
but yeah, so I didn't know until I took a pregnancy test, and even then I was certain it was going to be negative.
Yeah.
So I took the test and sat it down and was waiting for it to show the results, and I remember thinking to myself, even though I'm not ready to be pregnant again, because at that point I hadn't really worked through my birth trauma and I wanted to do all that first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even though I'm not ready to be pregnant again, it's kind of sad every time you do a test and you get a negative. And then I looked down and there were 2 lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it took me a little minute. I had to like check the box and be like, isn't 2 lines a positive though?
Yeah.
But yeah, as soon as I saw it was positive, it was like all fear just left, and I was excited again, and I went and showed Zave, and yeah, we were both just excited. It's you know, the timing is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. But life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. I really love that quote.
Yeah, that's it. So at that point I'd booked in, and again the timing's so funny because I think I'd only just recently gone to my GP to get a referral for a psychologist because I was ready to actually process the
Yeah,
trauma.
yeah.
Yeah, it was weird because it was like Hazel needed a gesture from me to know that I was ready.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah,
it's so strange that it happened right after I'd scheduled that. So I
yeah.
think I did the very first session with my therapist before I knew I was pregnant,
Okay,
and
yep.
got to say to her like I want to work through all this because I plan on having a free birth next time, and I don't want to be carrying anything from this first birth in with me that might
Yeah,
instill me with fear. And then I got
yeah.
to go back to the next session and be like, well, I'm pregnant.
Yeah. Time to face my fears.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of the shadow work really was processing what happened the first time, and
Yeah,
actually really understanding that it wasn't my fault,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
simultaneously acknowledging my role in it
Yeah,
because it's not my fault the way they treated me, and I didn't deserve for that to happen to me or for them to do that to me. But I had known from the entire antenatal care that these were people who didn't respect me or know me or support me. And I still went into the hospital that night with the, I guess, the naivety of thinking that I could just convince them.
yeah, yeah,
um, and, so it was sort of a blessing in a way to have that first birth and to realize that I don't have to convince anyone anymore.
yeah,
Um, so I was able to go into this next one unburdened by the pressure of talking anyone into anything or convincing them that I'm well and healthy or convincing them that I have the strength to do this. Like I knew, and that's
yeah,
all I needed for real this
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah.
um,
And how many weeks roughly was this kind of going through your mind?
just throughout the whole pregnancy, I think.
Throughout the
I'd
whole
done,
pregnancy, yeah, yeah,
yeah, I'd done so much work throughout the years since having Bo that I think by the time I was pregnant, there honestly wasn't too much more to work through.
yeah,
Um, there was actually putting the first birth behind me because that's what it felt like by processing it with the therapy. It really felt like it doesn't haunt me anymore, and it's an upsetting memory, but it used to feel like if I spoke about it, it was like I was going back there.
yeah,
Um, I I knew that the therapy had been successful when in our second last session she encouraged me to go through the memory and to imagine someone there with me like a spirit guide, and it could be
yeah,
anyone or anything. Like she said that
yeah,
sometimes her spirit guide is Wonder Woman, like it can be anything.
yeah, yeah,
um so I tried to imagine it with my mum there, like just as a person there to hold your hand and just to be there for you, not
yeah,
to change anything.
yeah,
And I was visualizing it like I'm on the table and there's all these people around and it's happening, and I'm trying to picture my mum saying to me, "It's all right, I'm here, you're safe." But it was coming out in my voice, in my head.
yeah, okay, yeah,
And then suddenly it wasn't her standing over me anymore, it was me. And suddenly I'm not looking up at me anymore, I'm looking down at me on the table, and it was like past me experiencing it. And I realized like I've switched roles, I'm not there on that table anymore, and I'm
yeah.
up here mothering myself, and I can mother myself.
Wow.
It was really surreal, and
Yeah,
I just knew like I'm not there anymore, that's her who's
yeah,
there.
yeah,
um It was very liberating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Wow.
yeah, so that I felt really unburdened by that for most of the pregnancy. I've had some
Yeah.
fears come up from time to time, like, the what ifs of, and mine weren't always super specific. They were things like, what if my labor stalls or my baby gets stuck in, halfway down?
Yeah.
And the way I would process that is I would write down the fear and then I would come up with an opposite for that. So if the fear is, what if my labor stalls, then the opposite for that bit might be my labor will progress at the pace that it's meant to. Um,
Yeah.
and then I would just tear up the fear or burn the fear and keep
Yeah.
the other one to reread.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that was really helpful. And every time I had a fear come up and I did that practice, it really did just put the fear behind me and I didn't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Amazing.
and the other thing was learning to treat fear as a friend and to welcome it and to see
Yeah.
what it has to offer me. So the other big fear that came up towards the end of the pregnancy was, for some reason I got it in my head that, like, what if my bladder gets really full and I can't pee and I have to have a
Mm.
catheter? I really don't want to
Yeah.
have to call like emergency services
Yeah.
for what feels like a really silly reason because it's so easily resolved. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so in that instance, I couldn't shake the fear by just rationalizing it. So I had to be a bit more practical with that one. So I learned how to insert a catheter and I ordered some catheters online
Wow.
just in case. Um,
Yeah.
we didn't practice it, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, I watched some videos and had the catheters there, and I just, as soon as I had them in the house, I knew that we wouldn't need them. It was just like
Yeah.
having that reassurance of having the objects there
Yeah.
was enough.
Yeah. 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 Just going back a little bit. So, at what, did you have a wild pregnancy then? A completely wild pregnancy?
Yeah, so we did the pregnancy test, and
Yeah.
after that, I think it was pretty much completely wild most of the way. I did
Yeah.
see my pelvic floor specialist at some point because I had really bad pelvic pain again.
Yeah.
And it was worse this time and from earlier on. Um,
Yeah.
so she gave me some exercises and um, then I ended up seeing my GP at about 35 weeks. And
Yeah.
I'm really lucky because I absolutely love my GP. She's like a medical unicorn. So she knew
Amazing.
already that I was planning a free birth from when I'd got my referral for the psychologist because I'd already mentioned it to her then.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's just like, very on board with women making their own choices for themselves. So,
Yeah.
um,
Amazing.
yeah. So I went in there and
And
I wanted a referral for an osteopath to help with the pelvic pain,
yeah.
and also just to, I guess, to medically confirm the pregnancy to make it easier to get the registration later on.
Of course.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so she said the easiest way to do that would be for her to do like a really quick Doppler scan to confirm the heartbeat.
Yeah.
And I was really reluctant because of the scan at the end of my last pregnancy
Yeah.
and how that
Of
cooked
course.
everything.
Yeah.
So she could see I was reluctant and she was like, it would just be quicker than sending you off for a full scan. We could get it done here today and I will be really quick because I know you're not wanting this. And in the end, I was
Yeah.
like, I'd rather she do it than anyone else. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so I'll do this. And
Yeah.
she was true to her word. She only held that Doppler on my belly for like a second.
Yeah.
It was enough for her to see the heartbeat, and she was like, "Cool, there's a baby in there. It's done."
Yeah. Confirmation. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Tick box.
yeah,
And because you said earlier that you know, a fear sort of before you had looked into it and whatnot around free birth and, you know, that whole world was like what your family would say. Like, did a conversation like that have to come up then about, you know, not engaging with care in, you know, air quotes, you know, with that sort of normal care provider pathway?
Not really, because by then, it's been years since I had that original thought. So I've
Yeah.
actually already had conversations with everyone by this point
Yeah.
multiple times, and everybody knew that my
Yeah.
next birth was going to be a free birth. Um,
Yeah.
oh, well, my family anyway, and I'm pretty close
Yeah.
with all
Yeah.
my siblings and my mum, so they
Yeah.
they were all very aware. Um, and I did have the thought when we found out we were pregnant that maybe I should tell them I'm a few weeks further along than I am, so that if I
Okay.
go to 43 weeks again,
Yeah.
nobody's like hounding me or freaking out or anything.
Yeah. Yeah, of
But
course. Yeah.
in the end, I just didn't. I was like, what am I worrying about? Like, my family's
Yeah.
not going to hassle me. I'm overthinking this. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't worry about that in the end. Um,
And so, you know, the doctor checks, you know, hindsight, we know it was twins, but like when the doctor's checking the heartbeat and, you know, through, like, at what point, or did at any point you think maybe there's more than one baby in there?
yeah, we certainly had the thought.
Yeah.
So there were a few signs. Like I felt my first flutters of movement at 9 weeks, whereas with
Yeah.
Bo,
Okay.
it was like 22 weeks. Um,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so that was a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I got the pelvic pain so much earlier, and it was a lot worse much earlier too.
Yeah.
And just I was so big. By the time I was 28 weeks, I looked like I was full term. But
Wow.
all of these things I was able to just rationalize and be like, well, second pregnancies are built different.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
I think in my mind, like, and we joked so much about it being twins,
Yeah.
but it was just so unlikely to me that I didn't even want to. I didn't even want to even think that it might be, and then have just one baby come out, because I think I would have felt
Yeah.
really silly.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have like any like increase in chance for twins, like in your like family history?
We didn't think so. So when we would joke about it, we'd be like, oh, well, there's no twins in either of our families, so like it's not likely at all.
Yeah.
We've since
Yeah.
found out that there's twins on both sides of our family.
Wow. Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Whoa. And so is there any, you know, certain like practices that you did during your pregnancies to kind of connect with your body or your baby, or to prepare for, you know, having a free birth? Obviously you've done like so much, you know, education and work, like a lot of work in the past couple of years, but was there anything else that you did in particular?
Yeah, so I kept a baby diary, and I did the same thing for Bo, where I wrote
Yeah.
about the pregnancy, and did that throughout. So it's like letters to the future child.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was so adamant that it was Hazel in there.
Yeah.
And we were actually going to call her Luna.
Yeah.
So this, like, all the entries start like Dear Luna.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. I was certain that Bo was going to have a little sister. I knew this child, like, and every time I like connected with the baby, it was Luna.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then maybe halfway through the pregnancy, or maybe even earlier, it was like Hazel went quiet, and I was
Okay.
having trouble connecting with her. Like, I would try to tune in, and I wasn't getting direct messages anymore. It was just very quiet on the other end.
Yeah.
And I just sort of brushed that off and was like, well, maybe it's because like she's not a spirit baby anymore. Like, she's actually physically in there, so maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
the messages come through differently. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so strange, but the womb went real quiet.
Yeah. Wow.
I still knew everything was well, and I was like really attuned with my body and the pregnancy from that standpoint. But in terms um like connecting with the actual baby, it was just a lot quieter.
Yeah.
And I think I put that down to second pregnancy as well. Like, you have less time,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah. So I didn't think much about that. Yeah. These boys were just they were just real quiet in there.
Yeah. It's so funny that, you know, they'll read these entries one day and you'll have to explain to them this whole story
Yeah.
because they're going to be like, Mum, what the heck?
I ordered us all Christmas stockings last Christmas,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I got a fourth one that actually says Luna, and I don't know what we're going to do with that.
Oh, well, you never know what the future holds.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, you know, when you were like having like kicks and movements and stuff, you know, later on in your pregnancy, did you feel then also that maybe actually there might be two babies in there more than just kind of like a what if?
Yeah, in hindsight, but I just sort of brushed it off. So every time I did belly mapping, I could not figure out what was going on. It was like, it felt like it was a head here, but it also felt like a head there. And how can the back be on both sides? I must just not be very good at this.
Yeah. Oh, that's so brilliant. I love that. I love that because, yeah, exactly. But then, yeah, you would be so hesitant, like you said, to call it twins, and then, you know, then there would only be one baby, and then you'd be like, oh, well, I'm just silly, you know?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And again, it's like I said earlier, it's so strange to be so in tune with my body, but simultaneously miss like the bigger signs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not miss them because they were there, but I guess I just rationalized them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, did you have any like, you know, because this is your first birth at home, did you have any ideas on like what you wanted your space to be like, or, you know, did you have any thoughts on what, you know, if you'd use anything in particular during labor or who would be there, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so initially I thought I really wanted a doula. Because I regret not having a doula last time to advocate for me. And I had thought that I would never have another birth without one. And we met with one local doula, and she was really on the same page about birth, and she'd supported free births. I'd had her recommended by like 3 different friends. But we just didn't click, and I couldn't tell you why, really. But yeah, a few weeks went by and I was sort of mulling it over, and on paper, you know, everything about her seemed like a perfect fit, but I just couldn't shake this feeling of like every time I pictured the birth and her being there, like my gut instinct was just that I didn't want anyone there watching me. I didn't even want anyone in the other room. Like I needed to not have anyone there that didn't feel 100% safe. So I ended up making that call, and that one was a bit tough um, because I had thought that I would never have another one without an advocate, and I've always been very vocal to people about get a doula, get a doula.
Yeah.
And I was also worried that maybe am I becoming hyper independent? Am I, doing almost the same thing I did last time of just stubbornly saying, well, I can do it on my own then.
Yeah.
But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, like, no, actually, what I'm doing is I'm really consciously being aware of who is safe to have around me and who isn't.
Yeah.
So I just really felt that this baby, and by this baby I mean Hazel because that's who was guiding me.
Yeah.
This baby was telling me to keep it in the family. So I knew I wanted Zave there and I wanted Bo there, and that was it. And maybe if I felt like I needed extra help, I had two sisters nearby that I could call. But I had a feeling that I wouldn't need to.
I think there's like such a beauty as well, having heard some twin stories recently, and obviously in hindsight we know you had twins, but twin pregnancies, especially in countries like Australia where the maternity system is like it is, like you would have otherwise been having scans like every fortnight, every week. You would be constantly fearmongered about equal size, or what kind of twins are they, like induction, like blah 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 blah. But how freeing that you didn't have any, like really any of that, like that fear wasn't placed on your I think
it was such a blessing.
So amazing. A blessing. And I guess
I was really conscious this time about that because of how fear had impacted me at the end of the last pregnancy. So I was so conscious this time of what I allowed in, to the point where I even had like a couple of books that my friend gave me, and they were like information packs for like first time mums. So they had all the stuff that you would usually see, like eat dates at the end of pregnancy, and raspberry leaf tea is good for this, that, and the other, and don't sit in the recliner too long for this reason. And all of that, I absorbed all of that in the first pregnancy, and I hadn't realized the impact that had had on me. And this time when I was flicking through the booklets she'd given me, I could feel the little seeds of anxiety bubbling up in me.
Wow.
And just how it was separating me from my instinct and making me question how I was doing things. And I guess I should be doing more yoga, or maybe I should be going for more walks, and maybe I should watch what I eat a bit better. And as soon as I felt that happening, I just closed the book and put it away, and I realized that it's this wall of information is separating me from myself. So I was really conscious about when that happened from that point on, and just what noise I allowed in and what noise I turned down, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Absolutely.
So in terms of the pregnancy, I did not eat a single date. I did not have any raspberry leaf tea. I didn't have evening primrose, or I didn't do spinning babies or yoga. I pretty much lived in my recliner because it was the only chair that didn't hurt my pelvis. By the end of the pregnancy, I was using a walking frame because the pelvic pain was so bad. I didn't leave the house at all for the last 2 weeks. I was pretty much chair bound. I ate whatever
How many
I wanted.
weeks? That's so freeing because there's so many rules that they enforce upon you. Pretty much if you're not having a wild pregnancy, you have all of these rules, placed upon you about what you should and should not be doing, and like, well, it's better if you do this and better if you do that, and like how freeing to have that, you know, not have that noise even. Like, I'm very, very jealous.
Well, if you
but you
ever
know,
have
that's
any more.
yeah, exactly. I hope that I would, you know, it's very inspiring to me to hear like the power of like women like yourself that, you know, choose to disengage from the system. Because yeah, all I could think in my second pregnancy was like, God, I wish I didn't have to go. Like, I hate going, it's a waste of time, they tell me stuff that makes me angry. You know, and that was the, you know, yeah, like, yeah, it's amazing. How many weeks then were you when you went into labor? Or did you have any signs of labor earlier on? Because, you know, there is like this common, I don't know too much about twins, but there's like this common sort of thing about like twins usually go earlier. Like, how was it in your experience then?
Yeah, so by the time I was about 35 weeks, I just really had the feeling they were coming soon. And I kept saying to Zave, I really think they're coming within the next few weeks, which is weird because it's so soon. But I also thought maybe my dates were off and I might have been 4 weeks further along than I thought I was.
Yeah.
So I was able to rationalize that too.
Yeah.
Brushing off all the signs.
Yeah, they're literally trying to tell you.
Yeah. But yeah, so the last we went out to a concert when I was 36 weeks, I think, and that was the last time I left the house.
Yeah, wow.
And after that, I just had like the nesting urge. Which was hard because I was physically so unable to actually do anything. You know, like setting up the pool or the birth space, or, you know, like I was showering on a seat at this point. Like I was pretty much debilitated. But yeah, had this surge of like bit of creative energy and to get the final things done. And I think I lost my mucus plug a week before they were born, maybe. So, and I'd also been having like, I think in the last trimester I'd been having like Braxton Hicks, and I knew they weren't real contractions. They felt different, but yeah, I'd sort of been having practice contractions. So I knew things were ramping up. And then on the day, I was 38 weeks exactly. And I just sort of woke up feeling a bit different again, like last time. And we ended up, so we had a shoot scheduled with my photographer that day, a virtual shoot, so she would be doing it through the phone.
Amazing. Those are the pictures that I've seen, I think.
Yeah, so that was scheduled for 4 p.m. I went and had a nap in the afternoon. I was feeling tired and I wanted to make sure I had energy for the shoot. So went and had a doze, and when I woke up, I went to the toilet and then got back up and just like my waters were leaking.
Wow,
and that hadn't happened last time, so that was new for me. And I just knew that things would be kicking off from there. So we did the shoot with me like, leaking fluids the entire time. In very early labor. I hadn't had any contractions yet at that point. It's like everything was holding off until that last thing was done. And then, so yeah, we finished the shoot around 5-ish, and since we knew that it was go time, we decided we'd have takeaway again, and like last year, or last time with both. and this time we watched Law and Order SVU.
Excellent. There's a theme.
Yeah, New York.
Yeah.
I don't know why that's the theme, but it is. Yeah, and then around 5:40, I had my first mild contraction. It felt like a cramp sort of running through my back. And from that point on, they were pretty consistent already, like every 10 minutes apart. Still pretty mild. By about 8 o'clock, I think. So 8 o'clock, Bo fell asleep and Zave put her to bed. And yeah, by 8:30, I think I was like in full-blown labor. So
Wow.
yeah, it's so much quicker than with Bo.
Yeah.
Like we thought we'd be in for another long haul. I thought it would be like 24 hours at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, things like when it's undisturbed and when you know you don't have to go anywhere, like I wonder if that made a difference because I was just able to relax so much more.
Yeah. Well, with Bo, I remember you said like before you went to the hospital, like contractions were like pretty close together, like and things were happening. But yeah, then, you know, it's all the little things as well, like signing into the hospital and, you know, or getting into the car is a big one. Like, you know, if you just stay put, then like it can be uninterrupted and yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, and just uninterrupted as well by the thought of having to later at some point go somewhere. Like I think maybe even Bo's labour might have been longer just for that reason of knowing that at some point we have to move location.
Yeah.
But yeah, so things ramped up from there. We didn't time any contractions, and I didn't check the time or anything. Yeah, so once Bo was in bed, I moved to the bedroom and Zafe was filling up the pool. And I was labouring on the bed, mostly on my hands and knees. I think I laid down for a little while. And yeah, I had to go to the toilet a few times. And by that point, it was already getting, like, just the walk down the hallway, I was stopping, like, every 3 steps for a contraction.
Wow,
So then it got to the point where, so I was in the pool and I knew I had to get out because I had the urge to poo again. And by then, I'd already gone to the toilet twice and the walk was, like, the most difficult part of all that.
Yeah.
So I had to say to my partner, like, I can't make that walk again. I'm sorry, I'm pooing in this bucket.
Yeah. Gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah, that's it. We crossed that bridge that day.
Yeah.
And yeah, then
it makes you stronger. It makes your relationship stronger.
Yeah, it was all part of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm back in the pool. I think I laboured on the bed for a bit. And by now it's maybe 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. Bo had woken up and come into our room and she was awake on the bed for a little bit and then passed back out.
Wow, yeah.
So by this point, I'm saying to Zave after every contraction, I can't do this anymore. And it hadn't even been that long, like, compared to Bo's labour.
Wow. Yeah.
I also don't really remember the contractions being that bad, so it's interesting how you forget.
Yeah, so quickly.
Yeah, so every contraction I'm finishing and going, I can't do this anymore. But also knowing that the only way out is through, like, I'm not, what else am I going to do? Like, it's happening.
Yeah.
So I didn't, Zave was, he was really good and we'd already talked throughout the pregnancy about, like, what sort of support I thought I would need. So he knew that I mainly just needed him to be there. Like he didn't have to do anything or say anything.
Yeah.
He just had to be a comforting presence.
Yeah.
And he was perfect at that. So every time I'm saying I can't do this anymore, pretty much all I don't even remember what he said, but it was just along the lines of "You're doing great."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all I needed to hear because
That's
I knew it in
brilliant.
my head. I needed some validation of that, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, eventually I had like some affirmations on the wall, and it was around that point when I was saying I can't do this that I was like, oh, I've got those affirmations. I'll cling on to one of those. So through every contraction, I'm going, I surrender, I surrender.
Yeah.
And just trying my best to get through it. And it was around that point that I sort of had this moment of clarity that I realized I was saying that I surrendered, but I wasn't surrendering. So what was holding me back? And I remember I was back in the pool at this point, and I just looked up at Zave and said, I think I'm scared of the pushing phase. And he just said, you're doing great.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And I just, like, as soon as I acknowledged that was what was holding me back, I was able just to let it go and move forward. And it was like at that exact point that I crossed over into the pushing stage.
Yeah, wow.
So, and I hadn't had this with Bo's birth, so I hadn't realized that maybe I was scared of getting to that point. Because I didn't know how it would feel. And yeah, it was different. So I went from being like really vocal through the contractions to suddenly I just didn't need to be vocal anymore. I just had to breathe deep and just like funnel everything down. And I started, like, I was almost like meditating. I was saying more of my affirmations and just going slow, soft.
Yeah.
And just reminding myself to just slowly open. And I could feel the baby's head moving down now, which was really reassuring. And then sort of at the apex of each contraction, I was feeling these pushing urges that I sort of could control. It's hard to explain. It's such a bizarre feeling. It's like I had to just allow them to, like, I had to just let go and let them come through it. And each time they came, I'd have to just release and let them do their own thing. I guess that's the fetal ejection reflex.
Yeah, it was uncontrollable, right? Like you,
I
it's a train and it's coming through.
Exactly. I could keep trying to hold it in, but I really had to consciously allow myself to relax enough to let it happen, because it's sort of scary. You feel like it's going to hurt if you let go. So and that, I don't know how long the pushing stage was. I think Zave said it was like an hour, but to me it felt like 15 minutes. It just flew by.
Wow.
Yeah, just crazy how the time changes.
It's like such a time warp. Like labor land really is like labor land. Like it's just you're on another planet.
Totally. So I just stayed on my hands and knees that whole time, just breathing, doing my chants. I pretty much didn't move at all. And eventually the head popped out, and the second I felt that happened, I just had the urge to get more upright. So I moved like onto one hand and one knee, and he just came straight out. And I caught him, and the cord was quite short, which surprised me because Bo's cord was really long.
Wow.
and I slowly pulled the baby up out of the water and saw his little face, and just immediately I was like, "You're not Hazel." This is
Who are you?
yeah. It was it caught me off guard.
Wow. Yeah.
I was like, "Whoa, hello, stranger, hi."
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
So yeah, I'm in the water and I'm holding him, and I hadn't seen the gender yet. But
Yeah.
I just knew that this was not the little girl I'd been waiting for.
Yeah.
And after a little bit, checked, and yeah, it was absolutely blown away that it was a boy.
Yeah.
And then I had like uncontrollable shivers, and I guess it was like a surge of adrenaline maybe. So I had to hop out of the water and get on the bed to warm back up. So yeah, thinking that that's that, and we're gonna lay on the bed now and
I've given birth. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And so, what's his name?
Oh, that was Eugene.
Eugene. So Eugene's born, and so everything, like, you're shivering, but you think that it's, adrenaline, like whatever, but there's no more contractions. It's quiet in that sense.
For a couple of minutes. Yeah, so I got out of the pool and onto the bed. I'd say we only had maybe 5 minutes before I got another contraction. My sister had said about, with her birth, that the after pains were a lot more intense. So I just...
Oh no, have you then just palmed it off as after pains?
Yep, I was able to rationalize one last time.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, got this, and this contraction just took the wind right out of me. Like, I'm laying on the bed in not a very conducive position for birth, like laying on my side, and feel this contraction just overwhelmed me. I had to like hold onto the headboard, and it was horrendous. And I just thought, oh my God, they were not kidding about these after pains. Far out. So I got Dave to mix me up some of my after pain
this
tincture.
Is too good. Yeah.
And the placenta release, because I'm like, my God, I've got to get this placenta out, thinking that will stop the after pains, even though that doesn't actually, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I've got to get this out of me.
Yeah.
So
this
on some level, I knew there was something that had to come out. Very promptly threw back up the tinctures he gave me. Still didn't occur to me that was a sign of transition. And so that I kept having those contractions, and they were coming like every minute or two. They were really close together for about an hour, nearly an hour.
Wow.
He probably would have come out a lot sooner if I'd realised he was not a placenta.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, so they were so painful, these contractions, because like I said, I'm not in the best position. If I knew I was in labour, I would have changed positions. But at this point, I think labour's done, and I'm trying my best to rest.
It's like these bloody after birth pains. Sweet. What's happening? I'm meant to be in my blissful 4th stage.
Yeah, did not get that. In the end, I had to ask Dave to cut the cord because it was too short, and I wasn't really able to. I was so distracted by these contractions, I wasn't able to bond with Jean at all. So I had to pass him off to Zave, and I was like, I've really got to concentrate on getting this placenta out. So, continued labouring for like an hour, and screaming the house down. I was
Yeah.
so close to telling Zave to put a note on the door just in case someone called the police.
Oh my God.
I was that loud. I was actually screaming.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
And then eventually, after, immediately after a contraction, I thought I've got to get upright and try and get this placenta out. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
Very quickly, like I just had enough time to sit up and like squat off the edge of the bed, and
Yeah.
this placenta just came out with one big push.
Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to mention I was having pushing urges that whole time as well, and I thought that was a bit strange, but I also thought, well, my body's trying to push the placenta out, so I guess it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, sat up, had this pushing urge, and just out he came in one big push. And
It's a funny looking placenta.
Well, I didn't look straight away. I just took it for granted that it was a placenta. I am just like looking at the ceiling like, oh, it's done.
Finally.
It's
Yeah.
finally. And then I sort of come back down to earth and I hear Zave going, quick, pick him up. It's another baby. And I look down at the ground and it's another baby.
Oh my gosh. Oh,
And
that's the best story.
He's very lucky he landed on the soft mats that we had underneath the pool and not on the floorboards.
Yeah. Well, I've heard lots of stories about, people, like women going to, like, trying to walk to the toilet or walk to this way or walk there or standing up, and the placenta just falls out and goes splat on the ground.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very lucky.
Also lucky I didn't stand straight up, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't far from the ground.
Wow.
So yeah, picked him up and saw it was another boy, and me and Zave are just looking at each other and just laughing.
Yeah.
Because the universe played a very good joke on us.
Yeah. Oh, that is just, yeah. So what's going through your head at that moment? Like, what the heck? Or like, just like in disbelief?
Yeah, just, I mean, I still can't really believe it.
Yeah.
I still laugh thinking about it because just the unlikeliness of it, the amount that I brushed it off, and like it was all right there in front of me. It's so funny to me.
Yeah, it is. It is funny, and like, yeah, like I don't even have words. What a story! Like, you're gonna have to. What's the second baby boy's name?
Freddy.
Freddy,
and
so cute.
So named because Zave thought it was funny because Fred landed on his head.
Oh.
And I figured I picked the name Eugene, so he should get to pick the next one.
It's only fair. It's only fair. Like, yeah, telling like Eugene or Jean and Freddie this someday, like, I wish I could be there for that conversation, because that is such a good story, and they would be, I want to say a handful, but I'm not even sure that many of like surprise freebirth twins in Australia. Like, what
I've heard a couple. Like, yeah. I don't think it's common. Yeah.
Yeah, but like health professionals, like, obstetricians and like, I think they wouldn't even, like, there are so many health professionals out there that don't even know that like this, they can't think outside of the box that this could just happen. It could just physiologically, you could just have twins unknown at home by yourselves without any issues. Like,
yeah. And imagine, like, as a plus size woman as well, who probably had undiagnosed gestational diabetes.
Oh, air quotes.
They'd be ripping their hair out.
Yeah, they were just like, that in itself is hilarious. Like, because you'll have gobsmacked all of these people, you know, that obstetrician with all these years of experience would not be able to figure this out.
I get the feeling she'd be mad about it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And is Bo awake or is she asleep when this is happening?
Yeah, so we'd spoken a lot with Bo in advance about whether she wanted us to, if you're asleep, do you want us to wake you up when the baby's being born? And she'd always said yes. So yeah, when Eugene was nearly out, I did tell Zave to wake her up. So she saw Eugene born, and she got in the pool with me, and she was bonding with Eugene, and the whole time I was labouring with Freddy. So she was loving up on having a little brother, and then Freddy comes out, and we, she'll look over at her and say, "You've got two baby brothers," and she almost had this look on her face like, "I'm too tired for this shit. Like, what do you mean?"
What is my mother doing? Who does she think she is?
Yeah, she it wasn't shock or surprise. It was just sort of an exasperated, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So what has the past 4 weeks been like? You know, we didn't talk about the placentas. So
yes.
Did they have the same placenta or separate placentas?
Yeah, so they did share a placenta, which is cool. But we didn't know that yet. So, Freddie came out, and then I laid down on the bed again and, got ready to birth this placenta.
The actual placentas.
Yeah. But so I stopped having contractions as soon as Freddie came out. And I was just gushing blood, like, I could feel it coming out as I was laying there. Every time I moved a little bit or coughed, like there was more blood coming out. And it got to the point where the bed was soaked. And I still wasn't too worried because I felt okay. And one of the fears I'd worked through during the pregnancy was, what if we have to transfer and I have to go back to that hospital? And I'd gotten to the point with that fear where I thought, as long as I'm in charge of all decision making, then that's what's going to be empowering. So I just don't want the rug pulled out from under me. I don't want anyone else deciding when it's an emergency. So Zave was really cool. He wasn't worried at all because he knew that, and he was ready to follow my lead. So I'm feeling good, but also feeling like this amount of blood coming out does not really feel like my normal. And I tried getting up and putting a little bit of traction on the cord to see if the placenta was ready, and it wasn't budging. And when I squatted to see if it was ready to come out, a whole bunch of like chunks came out. And we later found out that they were blood clots. But at the time, like, some of these were like fist sized, so they were big clots. And I thought that maybe my placenta was coming out in pieces. So I was like, I'm not sure this is normal. Let's call an ambulance. But it was good because I felt totally calm, and like, I didn't feel any sort of fear or hesitation. I just saw those chunks and I was like, that's probably not normal. Think we might need some help now.
But to use the system in the way that, I say this all the time, like, it can be helpful,
And, my experience of Bo's birth is that they absolutely fucking love an emergency. They're good in an emergency.
They're real
so
good at emergencies.
They make emergencies.
They love them that much. They're practicing emergencies all day long.
Yeah. It's like how like chefs just work really well under pressure. They sort of thrive off it. or like
Yeah.
firefighters.
The adrenaline.
They're thrill seekers.
Yeah,
These
that can be
healthcare
the only
workers.
explanation. Yeah. So good. So good.
So, yeah, we called the paramedics, and they were there really quickly. They were really good. They did do fundal massage, which in hindsight, I think I probably could have had a say in. Like, I could have said, actually, I don't want that. But by that
Yeah.
point, I had made the decision to call for help, so I was letting them help me.
Yeah.
So it was not comfortable. It was very painful. But I wasn't going to tell them to stop either. It didn't really occur to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did ask them to take a break a couple of times because I needed to catch my breath, and they were good about that.
Pretty full on. Yeah, cool.
And yeah, so took the ambulance to the hospital, and I was a big baby in the ambulance because at that point I was still bleeding a fair bit, so they did like fundal compression, which is like fundal massage, except they just hold they just push on your belly and hold, and that was really painful. It was so painful I like couldn't breathe. So I was actually, I was like yelling, stop, please. Like, I can't breathe.
Wow.
I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And she was saying, like, no, I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry, but you've got 3 little ones at home and you have to get out of this alive. And, I'm sorry, I can't stop. I'm here to save your life. And I was so close to being a little smart ass and being like, just let me go. It's fine. Just let me go.
Yeah.
But then they gave me some fentanyl and I was okay after that.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, I was in pretty good humor the whole time. It sounds so horrible, but it after my first birth, like the fact that I was empowered in the decision making on this one made all the difference.
Yeah.
Like, I knew that they were there to help me, and I'd asked them to help me. So even though it was painful, I'd consented to it. It's different.
Yeah, but also, like, this is in response to something, it's like if you're drowning, sure as hell I want someone to jump in to save me, but please don't stop me from getting in the beach. Like, I still want to get in the water, and if I need help, I want the help then, like,
exactly.
I don't know why that's so radical to think about, but I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, the only downside of it really was that Bo was awake and watching for that whole thing. But I mean, what else can you do? So, and I made sure that I was reassuring her the whole time and saying, I feel okay, I'm all right, I'm going to be safe, they're taking care of me, they're here to help me, all that kind of thing. And during the pregnancy, we'd watched a lot of birth videos and talked about blood, and I'd said to her, like, sometimes there is blood and that can be totally normal, she's not in any pain, look, she's smiling, all that kind of thing. So I think she was all right, and I was really focused on just making sure that she knew that I was okay. So yeah, her and Zave's got these 2 naked babies in his arms and a toddler to wrangle. As they're prepping me to go in, because they were going to manually remove the placenta under general anaesthetic. And by the time we got to the hospital, I was pretty exhausted, so I was like, please put me under. I'm ready for a break. Can you wheel me there a little faster? So he had the kids and was waiting in a room for me to be done in surgery. And then we were at the hospital for 2 days, I think, because I had to have a few blood transfusions. I lost 1.4 litres, they estimate, which isn't as much as I thought.
No.
Yeah, my sister came round to our house the next day to pick me up some clothes, the nurse sister,
Yeah.
and she
Yeah.
said that wouldn't have estimated more than a litre as well. Like she said, it wasn't a lot of blood. So
Yeah, wow. Okay, interesting. Especially for
hmm.
two babies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes
Yeah,
me wonder
okay.
if maybe if we had stayed a bit longer, like maybe it would have been okay. But I also did just have a gut instinct that the placenta wasn't coming.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And the doctors did say the next day, I asked them if it had come away from the wall at all, and they said no, it was still fully attached. So
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, interesting. But like, yeah, you used the hospital for the things that they love doing. They're
mm,
there to, respond to those situations. And um yeah,
yeah,
not every birth is going to be, this completely uneventful thing. Like birth can be pretty eventful wherever you are, but I guess
mm,
the issue is that like in a lot of situations the health providers and the health system, they're creating those events. Their events are just not, naturally occurring, and that's the problem.
yeah.
um
But yeah,
yeah.
sometimes real emergencies do happen. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
maybe like it.
exactly.
There's different ways that different people could have handled it, but like I followed my instincts,
Mm.
and I think that's all anyone ever really should do.
Yeah, yeah,
Everyone's
absolutely.
instincts are going to be different.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess, thinking about the past couple of weeks then, off the back of that like the most incredible story I think I've ever heard. And I've heard a few by now. But then also, the 2 days in hospital and the blood transfusions and whatnot. How has like adjusting to life with twins been? Like, has that been like pretty full on, or have you felt supported, or just still getting through it?
I've felt really supported this time. Like it's so
Yeah.
interesting because after Bo's birth, being in the hospital, the few days that we were there, it seemed like none of the midwives knew what had happened during my birth. Um, like a few times I was struggling, like having trouble sitting up in bed because of the pain, and a midwife would be like, "Are you okay?" And I had to be like, I just had a traumatic forceps delivery. Like, did no one tell you? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, like nobody knew what we'd been through. And one midwife actually, she caught me crying at one point and asked if I wanted to talk about it. So I told her what had happened. And at the end, she was pretty much like, but you did say the cord was wrapped around the baby's neck. Maybe the doctor was just, yeah, I was just like, fuck off. I regret telling you
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Oh my
um,
gosh.
and nobody ever sent for like, nobody sent in like a social worker or like someone to
Yeah.
check in on my mental health or,
Yeah.
we just went
Yeah.
home and that was it. There was no
Yeah.
support from the system.
Yeah.
And honestly, like postpartum, that time hit me like a ton of bricks, and as it does for most first time mums. But in hindsight, I didn't feel like I had as much support from my family as I needed.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about things like meal trains and,
Mm.
people coming in and doing dishes or chores and things. So, and me and Zave were both still such people pleasers that we
Yeah.
didn't want to ask for help or lean on anyone.
Yeah.
So yeah, this time I was more conscious of asking for help through the pregnancy and the birth. So like instead of a baby shower, this time we did sort of like a mother blessing, but I just asked it. So it was only like my sisters and my close friends, and I just asked them each to make something like a craft or a totem or
Yeah.
like paint a picture, just, come up with something that I can have in
Yeah.
the birth space as a symbol of like you being there with me, because I want
Yeah.
support in the room with me, not you there physically, but I want to know that you support me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had a few things in my birth space that really were helpful. It was like, I don't know if anyone listening will have heard of the term gossips. I heard about it through Rachel Reed.
Me too.
But yeah, that concept of your women friends and family being in the room with you to just drink cups of tea and to be there for you and to lend a
Yeah.
hand. Like
Yeah.
having those things in the room with me was like my gossips were there.
Yeah. That was beautiful.
Yeah, and so yeah, then the postpartum, we had a lot of people make meals for us this time, which you can't underestimate how kind of a gesture it is to make food for someone, even if they don't
Yeah.
need it. It's
Yeah.
to know that someone put time into, like, time and energy and resources into preparing nourishment for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't be undervalued.
Yeah.
So that was amazing. And like as soon as everyone found out it was twins too, like my family group chat was blowing up with people being like, "Oh, you've had boys? Well, we've got all these hand-me-downs, so I'll bring them round. We've got
Wow.
plenty of baby clothes now, and
Wow.
I've been on Marketplace looking at twin strollers for you and bouncers and bassinets, and
Wow.
like
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
really rallied."
Yeah. Yeah, of course, because now you've got to. Well, at least they're both boys. I mean, clothes have no gender, of course, but at least they can wear the same outfits and share the same things. At least for
Yeah.
this period, like,
And honestly, it's been funny because even though they're twins, I can dress Eugene in pink clothes and it looks really good on him and he doesn't look girly.
yeah,
He still looks like a boy baby. Pink suits him.
yeah,
But
yeah.
Freddy, I can't put Freddy in pink. It doesn't suit him.
Really?
It's so weird.
Oh, that's so cute. Do they have can you already see features that are different, or do they look pretty identical?
It's so hard to tell because I can tell their difference as their mum.
Yeah.
And I think there are differences, but
Yeah.
sometimes I do still get them confused.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And yeah, we don't know for sure whether they're identical or not because
Yeah.
so they shared a placenta, but they're only identical if they shared an amniotic sac. And
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
sure
Yeah.
about that. So
About that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Holy moly, Georgia. I know this has been a longer episode, but
Yeah. Sorry,
what
I had
a
no idea
wild
it was going to be
ride.
this long.
No, I'm so grateful for you taking the time, and being so honest and open and sharing your experiences, because I love hearing about it. It makes me angry and fired up to hear, about how fucked up the system is and how, women are treated, but
Yeah.
completely on the flip side, also just how possible it is to have such incredible, we're laughing about, the twins, there's laughter involved, and that's I'll still laugh about that when I'm editing this back. I'll still be laughing about how crazy that is, that you thought it was a placenta, but it was another baby. And it really, truly was a surprise because, some people that listen, this might be the very first time, like me, I've never heard of a surprise twin. I've heard of them, read them maybe in a news article, but I've never heard an actual story about it before. And I just the fact that all that you've gone through, and then wow, all power to you. You're incredible.
They feel like the two births like Bo and then the boys, it really does feel like bookends of the same story, because I feel like my whole journey from first hearing that podcast with Jane Collins Hardwick, I have been going on this journey of like unraveling and unlearning so much, and really deeply trusting myself and undoing all these people-pleasing tendencies that I didn't really know that I had. I, as horrible as Bo's birth was and as angry as it makes me, and it shouldn't have happened, in some ways, like, I sort of am grateful for all that it led me to. Like, it was a key part of my journey.
Yeah.
And I do want to say as well,
all of the lessons.
Yeah. I want to say as well that for anyone who's been through birth trauma, it really does feel like you're never going to get past it, because a part of you doesn't want to let go of that anger, I think, because you're right to be angry. And I know for a long time, even when I started the therapy, I remember saying to my therapist, I kind of suspect I'm going to be one of those people that's resistant to the treatment, because there's no way I can ever get past this. It was such an injustice and such a violation. How can I ever move on from this? I really couldn't fathom it. And so if you're currently out there in that position of being unable to fathom moving past it and letting go, it is possible. It doesn't take another birth. It takes the therapy. It takes the shadow work. But it's possible, and it feels so good to have it as just a bad memory instead of this full body trauma that you carry around and that haunts you like a cloud. Yeah, like you can move past it. It's possible.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, you're the perfect example of that. And it's not without so much work and effort and time and energy and like money and
that OB owes me.
In my opinion, she should be paying for all therapy that needs to occur.
I get the feeling she owes a lot of women.
Wow. I'm so excited to go tell my husband about how I've just spent the past 2 and a bit hours. Thank you so much for chatting to me, Georgia. I wish you lived closer. But
it would be great to have a cup of tea.
It would. And also, I love your photography Instagram account. And
thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No worries. I've loved chatting about it, and it was listening to birth stories through the past 3 years that really, I think, was the biggest help for me. And like birth stories, women in general just have such a strong oral tradition, and we can't underestimate how valuable these stories are.
100%, absolutely. So if you're listening, please definitely share this episode or share any of the episodes or share the podcast, because that's what it's all about. Like, so that women aren't just sitting at home on their couch with their baby or babies, having no one to tell their story to. Like, it should be something that we're able to talk about and share, and that other women can learn from and be inspired from. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the podcast. That's what I hope I do with the podcast. But thank you so much.
Real power here in reclaiming our stories. Absolutely.